Hello, folks. So something came up in a comment after the Holocaust book review I did yesterday about terminology of the Holocaust. So I thought I would leap on and give you my thoughts while it's fresh in my mind. So the person stated that the Holocaust should specifically refer to the 6 million Jews killed under the Third Reich, as opposed to the wider figure of 11 million, including the Roma and the homosexuals and the intellectuals and the mentally handicapped, etc., etc., etc. So I will concede that it does seem to be more common on the internet and in Holocaust organizations, museums, that the Holocaust should specifically refer to 6 million Jews and not the wider figure. But I will explain why I think it should include the larger total. And the reason is this. If we refer to the Holocaust as the 6 million Jews who were persecuted and murdered under the Third Reich, under their ideology, it means it's a situation that many of us have no connection to, myself included. I have Jewish friends, but I have no Jewish ancestry, no Jewish heritage. So it would be possible for me to consider, well, it's not my problem. But at its heart, what the Third Reich, what the Nazis were doing was this. They were deciding for groups of people how they would classify them and whether or not they were welcome within their regime, within their system, okay? So not by the person's definition of themselves, but by the Third Reich's definition of that person. So you could have someone who maybe was intellectually less than other people, but were living a perfect life, happy, but by the Nazi classification, they were considered mentally handicapped, and so therefore they could be sterilized or persecuted or locked up or at worst killed. Or where they're from, their nationality, their ancestry, their beliefs. So myself, right? I was christened as a child. Now, if at some point an organization were to go through my records and find that I was christened when I was, whatever it was, I was 2 years old or something like that, they would maybe want to label me as a Christian. Now, I haven't been to any kind of church service in 50 years. I define myself as an atheist. That's just a personal opinion of mine. I do not believe that there is a deity. It's a lack of a belief in gods. Now, but this label that I was given arbitrarily by my parents at 2 years old could hang over the entire rest of my life and cause me to be labeled as something. The same under the Third Reich with homosexuals, poets, intellectuals. So I think it's way more important for us to think about the wider figure of the many millions who were killed under the Third Reich, because it brings us all into the story. We all have within our families gay members. We have people who are disabled. We have people who are mental issues. We have people who are activists. I was kind of out there and protesting in my teens, early 20s. My stepdaughters are out there, quite radical. They go to marches in Paris and things like that. Now, does that mean they should be labeled as troublemakers and potentially be arrested because they have different views to a government? Well, under the Third Reich, both my stepdaughters could be arrested and imprisoned for that. And that's not even going into how my friends and young people would define themselves in terms of sexuality, in terms of this, that, and the other. So this is why I believe it's better for us to consider all the range of people that were persecuted and murdered under the Nazi regime, not just labeling it to one group of people. I remember on tours, when I was doing regular touring, speaking to Americans perhaps, or Brits who were going to Poland or going to Germany, and the discussion would come up about whether or not they're going to go to somewhere like Auschwitz. They would say, oh, no, we don't have any Jewish heritage. And I understand that point of view, but thing is, as I said, it's meaning it's not your problem, not your situation, not your history, not your problem, it doesn't affect me. Well, the thing is, people imposing their ideology on other people may not affect you today, but it may affect you tomorrow. That's the point I'm making, is that by someone else deciding how they classify me, and that when we come down to the Third Reich and the Holocaust, that's one of the most horribly fascinating aspects of it is people who didn't even define themselves as Jewish were labeled by the Third Reich as Jewish and were sent off to their deaths. You know, people who were not observant, they were married into the Jewish faith, or they weren't even considering themselves married into the faith because the person they were marrying was not an observant Jew. They were just marrying a person who they fell in love with, and they ran a business together, or that person was a doctor, or that person was whatever that person was. And then the Nazis decide, oh, well, you're Jewish then, so we're going to kill you, or you're homosexual, or you're this, or you're a poet, or you're an intellectual. And I think that is why it's important to remember the all-encompassing nature of the evil, fanatical, terrible ideology the Nazis instigated. And that brings me to the second point I'm going to make today, and that's about labeling generally. We've talked a lot on this channel about words like resistance and collaboration, and how loaded they become. And resistance implies you're going out blowing up trains, and collaborating implies you're a dirty turncoat who's selling Allied pilots to the Gestapo for cash, when in fact resistance can be as simple as being defiant. It can be listening to a radio you're not allowed to, or it can be passing on food to a person you know is passing through your village. Perhaps they're an escaped POW, or they're a person escaping persecution, but you help them with food. That is an act of defiance against the regime, but it isn't necessarily making you resistant. And collaboration. You know, my partner's family were living under the German occupation in Normandy, and as farmers, the Germans would come and say, you must produce hay for us, you must produce milk, and if you don't do it, you get shot. So if you comply with that to not get shot, are you a collaborator? We've discussed this before. And so one of the ways I try and look at the world is in regards to innocence and guilt, in that I would like to think I'm sympathetic to anybody who is innocent, anybody who is being under a regime or under a war that they cannot control. So I'm not going to get too much into the way the Middle East is going right now, but I think it's perfectly okay to be sympathetic towards anybody who just wants to live a peaceful life, be they Jewish, be they Arab, be they Muslim, Christian, of another faith or no faith at all, be they prosperous or not prosperous. If you just want to raise a family within your peaceful existence, then I'm sympathetic towards you, regardless of under what banner someone else may label you, if that makes sense. The same for other places where there have been terrible troubles in the past, you know, the Balkans and Ireland and Africa, is that my sympathy goes towards individuals who are innocent, who just want to be nice people. And I've got a friend of mine, Australian friend of mine, who I haven't seen for a few years, who's arriving in town. Well, he's already in town. We're going to go to the pub tonight. And he was a photojournalist. He's lived in places like Jordan and Syria and traveled there extensively over the last 15, 20 years. And in his interpretation, the world divides into nice people and bad people. And my sympathies go with nice people. Now, whether those nice people are labeled by other people as being from a particular nation or particular religion or particular, ideology, that's a way of labeling them that they may not decide themselves. How would I define myself? I'm a Brit living in France. So, if Britain went to war with France, where would my loyalties go? I would be sympathetic towards France and Britain because my home is here. My nationality is British. Sometimes it's very complicated. It's difficult to label yourself going through this world we live in, and someone else's label for me may not be what I agree to myself, if that makes sense. So bringing it back to the reason I did this is I am behind the idea that the Holocaust is a problem that all of us should look at. A problem is an understatement of what it was. It was a tragic persecution of many, many millions of people, but it should be something that we should understand could be on any one of our doorsteps. It could be something that is coming around the corner for any one of us, wherever you're watching this from around the world, in what you like to think right now is a democratic government, or maybe you're watching this from a country where you're not even a democratic government. I don't know, but you don't know how close your country is to being under some kind of regime where the leaders of that regime decide arbitrarily that you are no longer welcome under that regime. A French government could decide theoretically, hypothetically, that Brits are not welcome here. and then suddenly I become one of the persecuted. Now, do I hide? Do I go underground? Do I pretend I'm something I'm not? This is what I'm trying to get across to people, is that 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 the threat of an evil ideology hangs over all of us. And that's not me being terribly depressed and looking at the world in a negative way. And most of us will go through our lives without being persecuted, thankfully. But we should be aware that it is just around the corner for many of us. So we should take heed of our fundamental rights to vote, to look at problems around us, to call out evil when we see it, to call out people who are being intolerant of others, to call out our friends who make inappropriate jokes or inappropriate comments. We should do that. We should do our bit. I'm getting ranty. This is not a political channel, folks. I'm not here to give my opinions. It's just I live through a simple mantra: is don't be an arsehole. Go through life not being an arsehole, and you should be fine. Everything else comes under that one banner. Whatever your faith is, whatever your lack of faith, whatever your nationality, if you go through life not being an arsehole, and I think the world will be a better place. And I think that's ultimately at the heart of this question that came up about the labeling of the Holocaust, brought into my head while I was getting up this morning. This idea of persecution and ideologies and labeling. So I, again, try and think of the world in terms of innocent people and guilty people, rather than putting them under a heading of being from a particular nation or particular religion. And that is how the Holocaust is most useful to be looked at and understand it. So there we are. I'm going to leave it at that. It was only meant to be a short idea, but the Holocaust, yes, technically it is, under most definitions, only the persecution of the 6 million Jews. But I think personally, we should refer to it as the persecution of everybody, regardless of whether or not they were Jewish or not. The intellectuals, the mentally handicapped, the disabled, the Roma, the poets, the radicals, the communists, everybody else, all the other groups of people who were murdered. So there we are. I'm gonna leave it at that. Thanks everybody for watching, and have a good weekend, and I will see you on the other side of the weekend. Cheers everybody. Don't forget, Lucy is on tonight with her First World War show on WW2TV. Bye everybody.